Hello, everyone. My name is Bhante Suddhaso, and I'm here to say a few words about Buddhist practice, in particular in terms of having a structured long-term plan for one's practice. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll say a few words of Dhamma, and then if there's any questions, I'll take questions at the end. So please feel free to type in questions at any time. And if there's questions when I'm done with the talk, I'll answer them then. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So the subject for this talk arose from a request, actually, to speak about exactly this topic, the topic of a long-term strategy or plan or curriculum for one's Buddhist study and practice. And what was interesting here was then when I was given this question, what came to mind for me was actually reflecting on my own approach to Buddhist practice, and actually the fact that I haven't had a long-term strategy or a curriculum of any sort. The closest I've come to actually having and using a curriculum was in terms of sutta study, where very early on in my monastic life, I made the decision to read all of the suttas, all of the ancient discourses in series from beginning to end. So to read all of the four Nikayas and the four lesser Buddha-Vachana books in sequence, start to finish. So this was something clearly structured, which gives a complete overall curriculum, one might say. But in terms of developing particular themes or practices or contemplations, I haven't had any such clearly structured strategy or plan. And reflecting on why is it this way? And it's recognizing that ultimately what we're doing in our practice is we are examining the present conditions of mind, the current needs of mind, and we're applying the appropriate methods and contemplations relevant for these current conditions, whatever conditions we're currently experiencing in the mind. So, for example, if one has need for practicing metta, then one practices metta. If one has need for cultivating mindfulness of the body, then one practices mindfulness of the body. If one has need for developing deeper awareness of impermanence, then one practices the recognition of impermanence and so on. If one has a lack of understanding of Buddhist doctrine, then one studies Buddhist doctrine. If one doesn't understand how karma and rebirth works, then one investigates the topic of karma and rebirth and so on. So then this is a much more flexible and fluid approach. So in terms of a strict curriculum, I do think that for any serious Buddhist practitioner, it is very important to read through all of the suttas at least once in this life. So that is actually one clear long-term study plan, which I recommend for literally everyone. If you're serious about Buddhist practice, then read the Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, start to finish, in roughly that order. And also the four lesser Buddha-Vachana books, the Dhammapada, Sutta Nipata, Udana, and Itivuttaka, also cover to cover, not skipping anything. So that is actually one grand overall curriculum, which is recommended for all practitioners. But in terms of the development of our personal meditation practice or our personal training of the mind, it's a bit more fluid because the nature of the mind is more fluid. The development of our mind training practice is something which has to be flexible and adaptable. Because the mind is constantly changing, and therefore the needs of the mind are constantly changing. The conditions long-term strategy or plan for practice? Well, it's actually not particularly relevant. What is more relevant is instead to first off get some sense as to what tools are available for us. So what tools are available for training the mind, for developing wholesome qualities of mind, for cultivating the necessary attributes of mind which contribute to awakening. And then to develop a clear awareness of the current state of the mind in any given moment, the current overall patterns and trends in the mind, so that we can apply the most relevant practices, the practices that are the most relevant to us. And this also underlines the importance of also having some kind of ongoing communication with Dhamma teachers. In particular, if possible, with people who are monastics, who are experienced with meditation practice, who are experienced with training the mind, and periodically to ask questions, to talk to them about what's going on in one's practice, what's going on in one's life, in one's mind in general, and ask for advice, ask for suggestions. And then to incorporate that feedback into our process of developing and refining and adapting our own mind training practices. So, broadly speaking, there are a few general things that are important to examine in the course of training the mind. So, as mentioned, there's the quality of mindfulness, of how sharp and clear and alert our awareness is, in particular, awareness of our body and awareness of our mental activities. There's the development of samadhi in the sense of how stable and steady the mind is. So cultivating a mind which is steady, stable, non-reactive, which is capable of holding still, which is capable of relaxing into a state of unity, of steadiness. And connected with that is also the development of equanimity, of non-reactivity. And this is something which, actually one of the best ways to cultivate this is whenever we're having any kind of uncomfortable experience. Maybe it's a little too hot or a little bit too cold, or maybe we're feeling a little bit hungry or a little bit thirsty or a little bit bored. Is just to stay with that sensation for at least a few seconds, instead of immediately trying to remove the uncomfortable sensation. We stay with it for a few seconds. And just train the mind in being totally okay with that sensation, completely accepting of that sensation, completely peaceful with that sensation. And this also is a very important aspect of training the mind, which then is, one, it's dependent upon mindfulness, so it supports the development of mindfulness, and also it directly supports the training in samadhi, and that when the mind is non-reactive, it's much more capable of holding still. And another very important part of our mind training is the cultivation of gentleness, of kindness, of generosity, of friendliness, of treating every sentient being we encounter as a friend. So from every human that we meet, even if they're mentally disturbed or even if they're a little bit unfriendly, we still cultivate a mind of friendliness, of kindness towards them. And all the way through every animal that we encounter, all the way down to the tiniest insects and mosquitoes, even the most annoying of sentient beings, we see them as our friends. We relate to them with the same friendliness and kindness and compassion that we do to our most beloved companions. And this also is a very powerful training of the mind. So in terms of a long-term strategy of practice, what we're actually doing is we're constantly trying to increase the wholesome qualities of our mind and decrease the unwholesome qualities of mind. We're constantly trying to sharpen and refine this development of wholesome traits and this reduction in unwholesome traits. So actually, if we want a long-term strategy, well, actually the Noble Eightfold Path Study in detail the meaning of each of the 8 steps of the Noble Eightfold Path and work on increasing them in your life. Whatever you're weak in, work on doing better with it. If you feel like right view is weak, well then work on your right view. Study the suttas, have Dhamma conversations, develop a better understanding of the Dhamma. If there's some particular area of Buddhist doctrine that you don't understand very well, then study it and ask questions to teachers about it. Right intention. If you're noticing that your mind has a tendency towards hostile or negative or aversive thoughts, or towards greedy thoughts, thoughts of attachment, habits of acquisition, well then work on your right intention. These attitudes of harmlessness and renunciation. If you notice there's some problems in your behavior, so maybe you have a habit of using unwholesome speech or of behaving in improper ways, well then work on developing right speech and right action. So through taking the precepts more seriously and especially being extremely attentive to how we use our speech. And the development, once again, of purification of the mind, training of the mind through the application of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. It's constant effort to build up the wholesome qualities of mind and decrease the unwholesome qualities of mind. So actually the Eightfold Path is already a lifelong strategy, a lifelong curriculum. But it's something which we do through constant self-reflection and self-examination, always considering of these 8 aspects of the path, what am I weak in? What am I in need of developing and improving? And whatever we're weak in, we work on focusing on building up that aspect of the path within our mind. And if we feel like we're actually doing really well in all 8 aspects of the Eightfold Path, then we can rejoice in that fact and just keep doing what we're doing. But constantly examining the qualities of the mind in terms of these 8 aspects of the path and making sure that we're cultivating all 8 of them to perfection. So these are a few thoughts on the topic of plan for practice, an overall long-term curriculum for Buddhist practice. And at this time, if there's any questions or comments, I'll be happy to respond to any questions or comments. And hello to the people who are checking in online. So hello to Jayanta, Naval, Manal, Sud, Andy, Vivian, and Furong, as well as all the other people who are watching but not checking in. And I don't see any questions or comments. So this might be the end of the session for today. So I wish all of you the best in your practice, and again to constantly examine your own mind and see where there's room to develop in terms of these 8 aspects of the Eightfold Path. I see one question now. So from Sud, there's a question. Sud says, at the basic level, would mindfulness improve with just focus on metta bhavana? To some extent, with practicing metta, so the deliberate cultivation of loving kindness or this quality of unconditional love in the mind, to some extent that will improve one's mindfulness of mind. But I would say that practicing metta alone is not a particularly powerful way of cultivating mindfulness. But rather cultivating mindfulness in terms of the 4 satipatthana, so mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mental objects. I think that's a much more comprehensive and important way of cultivating mindfulness. So just doing metta is and it's good, but I don't think it's a particularly powerful way of developing mindfulness. And Naval says, does staying with sensation mean we are supposed to tolerate them? Yes, absolutely. You're supposed to tolerate everything. That doesn't mean that we can't try to change something. So for example, if you step on a sharp object, you should still take your foot off of the sharp object. If you have a bacterial infection, you should still take medicine. So if something is actually damaging, then of course we should do something about it. Or for example, if you're in a situation of domestic abuse, you should exit the relationship as quickly as possible. But while a sensation is happening, then what we're doing is we're practicing equanimity, so non-reactivity. So keeping the mind peaceful and calm, regardless of what sensations are currently happening. And Sud further asks, how much time should one dedicate to cultivating Satipatthana versus cultivating Metta? There's no hard guidelines for this. This is something where you need to look at your own mind and see where you're lacking. If you're noticing that your sati is weak, then spend more time developing sati. Whereas if you notice that you're having a lot of aversion and hostility in the mind, then focus more on developing metta. So our practice needs to be flexible and adaptable, subject to changing depending upon the necessary conditions of mind. So there is no single answer to this question because it will depend upon each person. And for you, you need to look at your own mind and figure out what the answer is for you. And we have a question from Bhavani. Bhavani asks, how long it took for you to study those suttas and others? I read through all the suttas in about a year. It wasn't very long. I was doing 45 minutes a day, reading suttas for 45 minutes every day, and it took me about a year. Yeah, it wasn't very long. Yeah, it's really not a big time commitment. It's very reasonable. Usually for lay people, I recommend 20 minutes a day, which is extremely minimal. 20 minutes a day, and you can expect to get through all of it in about 2 years. So quite reasonable time commitment. Now, of course, if you read more, then you'll get through it quicker. That's the last question. So maybe we'll go ahead and wrap up the session at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.